All right, good morning. This is Circle Dwelling Communication Part 2. And this is sad news for you, but there's also going to be a Part 3. I'll get to torment you one more time. There's just quite a bit of material here to cover. And so I want to do a quick review of just circle dwelling itself. Circle dwelling is a term we coined, or maybe we stole it from somebody, but the idea that people that you have close, significant relationships with, you treat them differently. You dwell in a circle of love, you dwell in a circle of friendship, a bond of affection, and so how you relate with these people in the circle is different than how those that aren't in the circle. It doesn't mean that those that are in the circle you treat well and everyone else you treat terribly, or something like that, or these are your friends and everyone else is your enemies. It's not anything to do with that. It's more just, there's people that are closer to us, and so the tenor of our relationship with them, how we relate, the priorities in our relationships are a little different than those that aren't. So we basically say circle dwelling is treating a person as a collaborator, not a competitor. So if they're in your circle, you share common interests, common needs, common love, common affection, and so you collaborate with them on things, as opposed to competing with them. Competition isn't bad, and we talked about that. Competition is actually a positive force in our world, but the people that are in your circle aren't competitors. They're on your side. They're not on another side when you're in competition with them or at war with them. You're together. You're in this circle of this bond of affection. We talked about the win-win paradigm. The win-win paradigm is a term that Stephen Covey coined, and it's I call it a distant cousin to circle dwelling. It is a great concept, but it's not adequate to understand circle dwelling, mainly because it's primarily concerned with achieving the individual interests of everyone, whereas circle dwelling is concerned with meeting shared needs and deepening the bonds of affection of those in the circle. So win-win is great for what it is, but it's only a distant cousin to circle dwelling, and it doesn't really apply. Win-win is interested in having everyone succeed, get their interests met, where circle dwelling is our shared needs are being met. Circle dwelling communication, therefore, is talk, communication, discussion, dialogue, where we are constructing something together. So this lecture isn't on circle dwelling. We already talked about that, but it's talking about if you are in the circle with others, how do you communicate? And we said that the conversation should take on the characteristic of building something together. We're assisting one another to facilitate an outcome for all involved. So the dialogue should reflect this kind of cooperation, this mutual assisting of each other. It's friendly. We're working towards mutual ends. The conversation has everyone's interests in mind. Eugene Peterson is a Bible teacher, a Christian thinker, who has a lot of books, especially in the realm of pastoring. He's considered the pastor's pastors. He passed away, I believe, maybe a year ago or so. Anyways, he has this book called The Contemplative Pastor, and in that book, he uses three concepts to talk about this idea of circle dwelling and cooperation. And they are negative capability, middle voice, and willed passivity. And negative capability, he says, is the suppression of self in order to avoid projecting one's ego, but rather going for some kind of mutual win in order that what is more than me and beyond me namely communion, can come into existence. Those aren't his words. I'm taking his ideas and kind of stringing them together. So this negative capability, the ability, it's an ability to not act, or it's an ability to not dominate or project your ego in such a way that it overrides, just blasts through and drowns out everyone. So this negative capability, the ability to not project your ego and go for a mutual win, so that what is more than me, my ego, and what is beyond me can kind of organically surface, which is communion. That allows for communion. So that's the first concept he talks about. The second concept is this middle voice, and he uses the Greek language to talk about that. There's active voice, passive voice, and in the Greek there's this other voice called middle voice. We tend to don't have that in English, but it's speaking in a way that isn't solely active, making requests or issuing imperatives, or passive, limply submitting. But it's a kind of conversation where you're participating in what another person initiates in order to build something together. It's kind of like dancing, right? When you're dancing with someone, you're not just, if you're the lead in the dance, you're not just, pushing them along. And if you're, kind of the follower in the dance, you're not just like limply there and they're just being dragged along, right? It's this kind of initiation happens, and you participate in that initiation. And so in circle dwelling and circle dwelling communication, the conversation should look like a dance. It should look like there's an initiation, participation in that initiation, more initiation, participation in that initiation. It's this kind of very graceful interaction. That's middle voice. This is hard. This concept of middle voice is hard for us because we think in terms of active or passive. I'm either acting on or I'm being acted on, and it's very dichotomous that way. Circle dwelling communication, Christian communication, love communication, intimate communication, friendship communication is a little different than that. It's not active or passive. It's this middle voice. The other concept Eugene Peterson talks about is this willed passivity. The idea of taking seriously others in their uniqueness and the realities around us by practicing a willed and attentive passivity that is something akin to worship. So I'm willing to allow the other to be there. I'm coming to terms with your uniqueness. I'm reconciling myself and not allowing, these are all kind of related, these three concepts, but allowing your uniqueness, allowing the realities of the world around us to instantiate, to come into existence, and allow that to truly have force and to participate in the adoration and glow of that. That's why he says it's something akin to worship. So that's just a brief review, what we've gone over so far with circle dwelling communication. So now I want to move on to what are the objectives when you're having dialogue in circle with people in your circle. What are the objectives? What are the objectives? There's three basic objectives. Keep it truthful, keep it clear, and keep it warm. That's your three goals. It's pretty simple, pretty easy to remember. But that's what you're aiming for. So you're in your circle, you're communicating with people in your circle. You're going to aim at three different things. Whatever the case is, you're going to aim that the dialogue is truthful, that it's clear, and that it's warm. All right? So we'll go over each of those. So firstly, keep it truthful. What do we mean by that? Well, we mean whatever is true, say that. I mean, it sounds stupid. Believe it or not, this is kind of this is radical truth here. Radical understanding. We're like, this is revolutionary. But because it kind of is, because people, I think Kenneth Minogue says we lie 100 times a day, or we're lied to 100 times a day. There's so much mistruth in the world. Advertising is, in general, one big lie. You know what I mean? They're saying you're going to be awesome if you just buy this blouse, or if you drive that car, people will fall at your feet, crazy ideas, right? So circle dwelling communication means stick to what's true. Whatever is true, just say that. That's it. And consequently, or therefore, avoid omissions, equivocating and dissembling, right? Equivocating is, kind of dodging. It's not, actually saying the real thing. Politician speech, right? Politicians equivocate. Why? They don't want to say something that might alienate a populace of their voting constituents. So they don't want to they don't want to come down clearly often on things because they want to cast as wide a net as possible as far as their voters, right? That's equivocating, right? Say what you mean what you say, right? That's the opposite. So we don't, or dissembling is just another word for it. This word was made real to me during the Clinton impeachment nonsense. There was, Clinton is famous for saying it depends on what the definition of is. That's called dissembling. That's a textbook definition of dissembling, right? You're dissembling rather than putting it together, right? You're keeping it diffused and cloudy. We say the Sandman effect. You're sprinkling sand in people's eyes. So, and whenever you have that feeling, that cloudy kind of feeling from a conversation, there's dissembling is probably going on. When it's sharp and clear, that feels a certain way, right? So anyways, circle dwelling communication shouldn't have any of that, equivocating or dissembling. Avoid omissions. Sometimes, just to back up on that for a second, sometimes we think as long as we don't state something false, we're not lying, but that's not true. So omitting something can also be a lie. Because circle dwelling is the kind of communication that should go wrong, that should happen among people that share a bond of love and affection, there shouldn't be those kind of omissions. The only reason you omit things or equivocate or dissemble is because you're trying to manipulate. And this is a kind of communication that should happen among people who love one another, not try to control one another, right? Avoid overemphasizing or hyperbole. We said omitting things can be a lie, but overemphasizing things can be a lie too. Anything that it doesn't lead to a unadulterated, clear presentation of the truth is a lie. And you cannot have intimacy in a relationship. You cannot have camaraderie in a relationship. Friendship, you can't have a friendship when there's a lie going on. You can't do it. That's the biggest withdrawal from people is when they find out you've been lying to them. So circle dwelling communication has to be truthful. It should avoid omissions, but it also avoid hyperbole or saying something too strongly or overemphasizing it. And you've got to get used to this unknowing. What do I mean by that? Well, it's kind of related to those Eugene Peterson concepts. It means don't pretend you know something when you don't. I know there's that famous saying that says, better to be thought stupid than open your mouth and remove all doubt. And that's clever for what it says. But in this kind of communication, you don't want to fake each other out with what you know. You have to be comfortable with the idea that I don't know. Harry Kahn used to say that the first step to being educated is to admit that you're not. So in circle dwelling communication, you have to be comfortable with unknowing. I've talked about this before, but I've worked with a lot of attorneys over the years. And maybe this is, I don't know, this is probably not politically correct to say today, but when I've worked with male attorneys, you can never tell them anything. Even if you have the right thought, they tend to, this is maybe just my colloquial experience, maybe it isn't true of all men or women, but I don't know if it's this men ego thing, I don't know, whatever. It's just my experience. Take it for what it is. But if you're dialoguing with them and you're trying to work on this solution, they're the expert and they're going to be the one who says it, even if you're the one who said it. There's not an unknowing going on, let's put it that way. However, when I've worked with female attorneys, there's much more openness to receive your insights for whatever that's worth. It just might be my experience, but don't be like my experience with the male attorneys. Be like my experience with female attorneys, so that there's a genuine collaboration going on. So get used to unknowing, and don't be strategic in your conversation. Be plain. Don't be mad. You're not playing a chess game with people in a circle-dwelling communication. You're not playing a chess game. You're keeping things truthful. Don't be strategic about what you're saying. Just be plain about it. All right, keep things clear. First point is do the heavy lifting. When you're talking in a circle-dwelling conversation with people in your circle, don't vomit on them, your mind. And expect them to clean it up. Part of manners and love is to organize your thoughts. Do the heavy lifting. I'm not saying there isn't room for just, stream of consciousness kind of conversations. Of course there is. But if you're never putting in the effort to organize your thoughts, that's not going to keep things clear. So do the heavy lifting of organizing your own thoughts. We have that kind of key that we used, subject, summary, detail. Let people know the subject of what you're going to talk about, give a summary of it, and then break into the details as needed. A lot of times people start with the details, and then you might, after a long time, get round to figuring out what all those details, how to summarize all those thoughts, and then eventually you get it down to the subject. That's a lot of work. It's nicer for people to digest what you're saying, to keeping it clear, is to say, I'd like to talk about the lawns and keeping them mowed. Summary is, I think if we put the equipment in a regular maintenance schedule, we'll never get behind in our mowing because the equipment will always be ready to be used at the right time. Details are, I saw the other day that the lawns were getting really long, and then Jordan went out to mow, but the thing broke down on him, and so that meant and it was rain for another 5 days after that, so that lawn became like a jungle. Now, actually, this doesn't happen. We're really good at this, but I have to use some example. So, anyways, that's subject, summary, detail, right? So keep things clear, and then be precise. Jordan Peterson actually has one of his rules in the 12 Rules to Life is be precise. It's a great chapter. I recommend it, highly recommend it. But sometimes, keeping it clear means staying away from ambiguities, meaning generalities, things that you're not exactly sure about. We say about prayer, answered prayers come about when they're specific. Specific prayers lead to specific answers. In a conversation, specific topics, specific definitions, specific examples lead to concrete actions and understanding. So keep it clear. Be precise. And then keep it warm. That means the conversation should be positive. Should be a positive. It's something we're doing together. It's an atmosphere of acceptance. It's upbeat. It's not negative. It isn't a complaining thing that's going on. It's positive. You're assuming the other person has good intentions. You're seeking to dialogue with these people in your circle. It does not work well if you think they're out to get you. That's not going to keep things warm. It's going to put people on defense, and so just assume they're in our circle. Their intentions are good, and finally, be willing to sacrifice and change. So you have to be willing to adjust and sacrifice. That'll keep it warm. If you're going to dig your heels in, you're going to come to an impasse. This is a dance, and so there has to be this willingness to change up front. Be willing to change up front. That keeps it warm. So back to just a summary again. Keep things truthful. So this is your objective. You're going into tomorrow morning when you're going to start a conversation with somebody who's in your circle. Just aim at these three things. I want to keep it truthful. Whatever we're saying is true. I want to keep it clear. I'm going to do the heavy lifting. Subject, summary, detail. I'm going to not use ambiguities. And I want to keep it warm. I assume that we're on the same side here. I am going to trust that your motives are good, and I'm going to be positive about it, and I'm going to be willing to change. All right, that's the objectives. Now let's talk about the techniques. The techniques, boy, man, we're not going to get through this thing. I think it's going to be part 4. Anyways, three basic techniques: listening, manners, and symmetry. Let's go through those. First, listening. Seek first to understand, then be understood. This is one of Covey's laws, one of his 7 habits. But it's an excellent principle. When you're communicating, you need to listen, and in order to listen, you have to firstly seek to understand rather than be understood. If you're approaching the situation with, just getting your point out, that's not going to lead to good circle-dwelling communication. Approach the conversation with an ideal to understand the other people. That's your first objective. Once you have that, then then work on being understood. Covey says, we're trained all kinds of ways of how to speak and make ourselves understood, but we're not trained that well about how to understand and how to listen. Some of that is learning to read body language and listen with our eyes, he talks about. We don't have time to get into all that, but seek first to understand. Secondly, don't listen to respond, listen to understand. So sometimes, I don't know about you, but I've had it where someone's talking and you're thinking what the answer is going to be. To what, how are you going to, if you catch yourself doing that, you're probably not listening. So take some time to slow down and think through what am I actually doing here? Am I just trying to get my point across? Am I just trying to answer what they're saying? Or am I really allowing the deep understanding of what they're saying to wash over me? Don't listen to respond, listen to understand. And this goes along with that, diagnose before prescribing. You don't want doctors to say, you walk into a room and say, I'm going to prescribe, here, I'm going to write the script up. I didn't say anything yet. I've had doctors do stuff like that. Don't you really want to understand what's going on here first, I was at one doctor, they never looked at me the whole time. They were just at their computer, just talking to me over their shoulder. And they're prescribing things and saying that. I'm thinking, how can you know any of that? You're not even looking at me, Anyways, diagnose before prescribing. That means truly understand before you offer solutions. And restating is part of listening. This is one place where talking is actually listening. Try to restate what the other person's saying to the best of your ability. And when they can acknowledge that you're saying what they are saying, what you're actually mimicking well what they're saying, then you've heard, you've listened to them, you've heard them, right? So sometimes I just found myself a lot of times about to say what the person said, and it had nothing to do with what they were saying. There's shocking a number of times that that's the case. So this is a good exercise. Learn to restate. All right. Thirdly, manners in circle-dwelling communication. Avoid interrupting. This is hard, actually, because conversations are fast and furious, and sometimes you do talk over one another. So try to avoid that. Give people space to talk. If you do it, and it does happen, and it's not from bad motives, it's actually often because you're jazzing with them. Just apologize. And just get used to saying things like, "Oh, I just talked over you. Sorry, go ahead." That's normal. It's not if there isn't occasional talking over one another, maybe you're not really circle dwelling communicating. You're in a passive mode or something like that, or active. If you're too CB-like, I talk to Citizens Band Radio, where you pressing the mic, hello, this is me over here, then you let it go and then you listen to them. If you're too much in that mode, which is not circle dwelling, you may find the other people over talking or over speaking over you because you're not giving them breath to be dynamic about it. The other thing is, if you're just full of your own thoughts all the time, you might be stepping on people. Or it's just the dynamic of the situation. We sometimes, in the rough and tumble of conversation, talk over each other, and if you notice it's happening too much and you're missing the other person, just say it. Just say, "Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead." So oftentimes people say, no, that's fine. No, good, go ahead. They like the dynamic. So sometimes you don't know. But anyways, avoid interrupting, but if you do, just apologize. And now the big part of manners is nonverbals in communication. That means your eye contact. It means looking at the person. It means smiling at them. It means nodding. There's physical agreement with them. You're facing them. If someone's talking and they're not really looking at you, that communicates something. You're aimed in their direction, and you have a non-aggressive posture. Sometimes the crossing of your arms, the crossing of your legs, sometimes that can be interpreted as aggressive, because you're kind of closed in and so forth. Circle dwelling community, warm communication with those that you have shared interests with needs to be non-aggressive. So be aware of your body posture. Use your manners. Make sure that they're not accidentally feeling that you're in an aggressive mood or posture. And then lastly, symmetry. There needs to be a symmetry in the conversation. What symmetry means? It means this kind of like with like. It means a match, a matching with one another. It's kind of a mirror image. So that means you're going to match the other person. So sometimes that means you either have to slow down in your speech, or you have to speed up. Match the other person. Create a symmetry of similar tenor. And there needs to be a verbal symmetry. That means there should be affirmative expressions. It's not nice for someone to be, sharing risky things or, their heart with you, and you're not transmitting back that you receive that, or that you agree with it, or that you're happy with what they're saying. That's all nonverbals, right? So there needs to be verbal symmetry. Yes, okay. Right, that's good, that's good. There needs to be those kind of expressions and interjections. So I want to use, just go over a little example of this kind of thing with this philosopher Roger Scruton and Douglas Murray in this conversation that they have. And I want you to take note of the content of what they're saying, but maybe more importantly, I want you to note their body language and how they're interacting with each other. They look at each other. There's a back and forth. It's not just a discharge and then another discharge. It's this kind of cooperative. They're friends, obviously. You can tell it. They nod, they laugh, they smile, they interject. They make sounds of accepting and contemplating the other person's points. And they also give each other feedback during the discussion. And then, I want that part, you to really take notice of that. But I also want you to take notice of the content of what they're saying, because the topic that they're talking about applies to circle-dwelling communication.
Well, it's very hard to stand up and say that actually I don't agree with you.
Yes.
Because that's not the language.
See Murray, what he just
political debate that's acknowledged on the left. And this connects with, of course, what you were referring to earlier.
So he was referring to him?
The difficulty of installing a
Look, he's
custom
like
or
Murray's
a culture
thinking
of
about
discussion.
Thinking about what he's saying, nodding a little bit.
Of mob violence, like not exactly violence, but hysterical unity around slogans. And I think you don't get. I've often thought this that the left is very good at slogans. March forward into the future. And if you think what a slogan would be on the conservative side, it would be something like hesitate.
Are you smiling?
It doesn't work.
Are you laughing?
When it comes, no, I once saw an example
Now
of
he's
that.
building
One of
on
the only
it.
protests I've turned up to, I remember years ago, and I was with a friend of mine from Northern Ireland, a few of us, and I can't remember what the protest was, but at some point we sort of all chanted something, and then we stopped. We sort of did it once, and I said to one of the friends, "We're not very good at this, are we?" And she said, "Well, Douglas, our view is if you said something once, that's quite enough." And
you see Roger Scruton laughing, he's looking at him. They're both kind of tilted towards each
difference
other.
of habit, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to keep saying the same thing any more than you do.
It's also, though, it goes to the
building.
heart of what we think communication is. You know, if you think of communication as an exercise in respect for the other, you don't repeat yourself. Repeating yourself suggests that you're either demented or that you just don't care about the other person's response. You're prepared to override it and say the same thing again and again. There's no way in which a chanted slogan invites an answer.
No.
All right. That's interesting, isn't it? So you can see, they're building this thing together. They're aimed at each other. They're affirming what the other person's saying. Sir Roger's saying this deep thing, Douglas Murray is, really, he's in a contemplation mode, and when there's a clever phrase or a clever conclusion to their little story comes out, they both, enjoy it together. That's circle dwelling communication. And then, of course, the point that's being made here, the difference between often the left and the right is the left just are imposing an idea, with slogans, right? And Sir Roger's making the point, see, that's problematic for the conservatives because we believe in human, respect. Not that the left doesn't, but there's a more warm, not about a commitment to ideas, it's a commitment to people, right? And so, he's saying hesitate, and that doesn't work in a competitive dialogue, right? We want more circle-dwelling kind of dialogues. And he says that communication is an exercise of respect for the other. That's what circle-dwelling communication is. It's an exercise of respect for the other. Okay, I think we're going to have to end there. I was going to go on to circle-dwelling conversations. And so we're going to have to do that in part 2. Why don't we take a couple minutes and do some Q&A, or just share points. Anybody have anything? Marge?
Since we're used to this forum, right, this past week. Can you just say again the last thing you just said about, did you say communication is an exercise in what? What did you say?
Communication, and this is from Sir Roger, communication is an exercise of respect for each other. So if you look at that paradigm, let's see if I can, how do you go back? Oops, wrong way. So, these are respectful things here. Listening, using your manners, trying to achieve symmetry with the other person. Those are respectful, right? And so, if communication is an exercise of respect for each other, those are the techniques you have to use. Right? John?
I think in good communication, being humble and being willing to be changed, I think is being open to that is kind of I'm not saying a prerequisite, but an effect of good communication.
Absolutely.
Because if you're not open to being changed, or open to learning something new, or open to changing your view, then you're just going to be lobbing bombs back and forth. And I think that's true with learning anything new. It's almost like you have to humble yourself and say, I don't know. I want to learn more.
That's right.
and be open. And sometimes I think we're fearful, or I'm fearful, of what that will mean. And so I have to address my fear and say, if it's true, I'm going to submit myself to it. So it's a humble posture to say, I'm willing to be changed by this person, or at least adjust my view. If I might be really strong over here, and it's like, oh no, well, it's not all, what I think isn't all bad, but it needs to be calibrated more. And so I think humility is kind of maybe a key characteristic to being able to keep it warm.
Absolutely.
And to be able to receive from another person.
Yeah, that 100%, yes. I mean, that's exactly right. I talked about this unknowing. That's right. And you have to set aside your prejudices. Because the truth is, we don't know everything. It's just true, right? And this humility is just to admit that, right? To admit that I don't know everything. The past doesn't necessarily define the future. Yeah, though I may have all this experience and remember all these things, but that doesn't mean that applies perfectly to what's next. So this unknowing is to set aside the prejudices of even my own experience. It also means, this unknowing, or this humility that John's saying. It means let other people. Let other people's ideas live. Let them live, which means avoid shooting them down too quick. That's not going to work. Ooh, wait. Let them breathe. Let the flower fully come out, and that takes time, by the way. That takes time. So you have to allow for the time of that. This, thinking out of the box, like John's saying. Sometimes that's fearful, right? Because you think, oh, that means. But I'm just going to say this: have a healthy dose of '60s freedom. You got to be peace, man. There's something right. I endlessly, knock the '60s, but obviously there was something there, and I think it was this, trying to break out of, these tight and constraining concepts and look for new possibilities, because, sometimes, we stick to what we know. That doesn't mean it's always right. So you have to be willing to kind of, be free and let your mind go. Well, that's against that thing that we believe. Okay, you're going to do the right thing in the end. You're going to do the right. You're committed to the right thing, but just allow yourself to dream a little bit. What if that wasn't true? What if that thing that we believe is true, but it doesn't mean what I think it means? Explore. In the end, come back to the foundation. You're not going to deviate from it. You're not going to go off the rails. But allow yourself to dream. Have a touch of '60s freedom without going full hippie. Heidi?
I was thinking of what helps me so much is introducing doubt. And what I mean by that is, so I'm having a conversation with someone and I feel strongly something. I feel like saying I feel defensive. Just if I can get in my mind to stop, they might be saying something right. And it just opens the door, and now things are here. Or someone's talking and I think, I already know this, whatever. But maybe there's something more I can learn. And just introducing that doubt. Maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. Or sometimes when someone's wanting to change something, there's a change. That can feel threatening because you've got it all ordered and you don't want to throw the whole thing up in the air. Well, maybe there's something good that will come from this. Just introducing that little bit of doubt when you start to get your dukes up in one way or another in a conversation or in your mind. In your mind you're being defensive or stubborn or whatever the thing is, whatever fleshly reaction comes up. If you can just introduce a little bit of doubt, that there's a possibly they might have, I could learn from this, or possibly, then that helps me hear what they're saying.
Absolutely. Or minimally, let them say it. Even if you fully know what they're going to say. You know what I mean? There's a meta goodness in it that they're allowed to say it. Sometimes people think out loud. Us big mouths, we think out loud. I can't even think unless my mouth is moving. Thank goodness I have a wife who doesn't mind it. Other people aren't like that. They have to kind of get away and get their coffee and go walk out in the woods and have contemplative. Okay, I'm not that. I like doing that, but sometimes to clarify things, I have to hear my own words. So you're serving the other person sometimes by simply allowing them to do the thinking out loud, even if you're not going to gain anything from it. You do gain one thing to it, friendship. You gain love, you gain camaraderie, and you also gain an insight into that person where they're at. There's all kinds of things, even if you're not gaining, technical knowledge from it,
But you're also helping that person.
That's right.
To be able to think through what they need to think through.
That's right. Oh, and maybe also it's encouraging you to open your mouth a little bit more, to do your thinking. You know what I mean? Josh?
One thing I've noticed is helpful is the subject summary detail is almost a litmus test for myself when I'm walking out into defensiveness or humility with someone, because I've noticed 85% of the time I can't follow the order is because I've set all the details out as my defense. I'm trying to control the conversation and hedge all the bets against their response rather than just say, here's what I want, and letting their response be whatever, right? Here's the subject.
Amen. That's great.
So, yeah.
Yes, excellent. Leah?
One thing that's I noticed that's kind of neat is that a principle for me in a conversation is, you're not imposing your will on someone. Being a fellow louder person, loudmouth. A lot of times, sometimes when I'm talking with someone, I'm just using them as that bounce board to talk my own thoughts, which I'm just talking at them as an object. I'm kind of imposing my will. This is what I'm saying, instead of that balance. And that is the same principle that we were learning about at Acton on giant scales with society, the left. It's all about someone else imposing their will on someone lesser or someone that they think they can have it up against. So it's just, I love this material, seeing how, you can bring this down to the practical level. Like Heidi was sharing about, these practical things that God meets us. So one encouragement for me, just fresh off of Acton, is to realize that, these things do have application through this, through not imposing my will in a conversation, and it's those little things that can help me understand these bigger principles that we were talking about and knowing how to engage those in the wider world.
Yeah, that's a good point. Great point. Jared?
I think one thing that's kind of interesting, I've just taken note in the last couple of weeks, is sometimes you don't have the headspace to listen well. So being aware, if you see it as if you notice that repetitively, like, I just don't have the headspace for whatever number of reasons.
Sure.
It may be symptomatic of something that you need to change in order for you to be able to be available for another person.
That's right. Maybe too tired.
You may be too tired. So there's sometimes if you notice an element and you're not meeting these elements, it may be that there's some I'm calling it a system, some system that isn't working well in your own life, that if you can adjust that, it will give you space to do this circle dwelling element, like listening. I notice I'm too stressed out. Okay, so I'm not being able to be available. So therefore, I need to do X in order to be able to listen well. Sometimes we think, I just have to force myself to listen better, but that's really not going to get the result that you're wanting. It's back here that there's a change that has to occur.
No, that's right. Remember, our objectives is keep it truthful, keep it clear, keep it warm. So whatever you have to do that. Good. Derek?
Two things. One, I appreciate the physical manifestations you're talking about with listening. I think particularly of Timothy, who has this down really well. When you talk to someone and they're nodding, they're smiling, you can tell they're really engaged. You leave the conversation, one, you're energized, and it really affirms you in what you're saying. So I really appreciate that. Also, with what Uncle Jerry was talking about, with sometimes maybe you're too tired with the aspect of listening. I've noticed myself when maybe for whatever reason I need to move on, I want the conversation to finish, I'll sometimes just do the minimum for affirmations. I'll say, yeah,
Right.
I won't engage.
Right. You're saying, please end. Please end.
A more truthful way of, I could just say, I appreciate what you're saying. Can we talk about this?
That's exactly right.
Instead of
That's equivocating. That's dissembling. That's you're not keeping it truthful. That's exactly right. That's right. It's fine. We all know. We all have different pressures on us, and it's fine. Don't take it personally. I'll get into that in our next lecture about don't take things personally. But and I'll talk also about the role of anger. The anger actually has a role to play in circle dwelling. So, but yeah, good point. All right. Anything else? Kate?
Just really briefly, two things. I've really felt the love of God through the body when people have restated things to me. You say it's a part of listening. I think that's a great way to express it, because it seemed to me always just a really neat add-on. But ever since I first came living with Sarah, I was just like, wow. When she would say, so what you're saying is, and then she repeat, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that was so revolutionary to me. And then Tim's really good. Jared's done that. When people have done that to me, that spells love, like in a rare way to me. So I'm trying to work that into my own arsenal. And an unfortunate metaphor. And then the second one was just to camel it on what people are saying about humility, which I'm really not great at so far in communicating. But I saw Ellie back there go, yes, because what you said was exactly what we studied this past quarter in philosophy. Socrates gets up in front of his jury of about 500 people, and he tells the story of why he's on trial, and he says that, he said, the god Apollo at the shrine of Delphi told my friend I was the wisest man in Athens. And so I said, that's ridiculous. And so from that point on, I decided to prove the god wrong, and I went around to all the men in Athens that knew things, lawyers and doctors and everything, and I started questioning them to prove that I indeed knew nothing. But everyone, I found out, actually didn't know that much, and they were pretending to. So he concludes, and he says, therefore I said, the god's right. I'm the wisest man in Athens because I admit that I know nothing and everyone else is faking.
Wow. That's great.
So that just, arguments.
Well, and that's what we talk about. Brother Harry said, that the first step of education is to admit that you're not. Pride is a big block to not just warmth. It's a big block to knowledge. Circle dwelling. Maybe that's why people don't like doing it sometimes. And it's rarer to find people that do it because it really does require virtue. It requires humility. And ultimately, only Christ can do that in a person. God apparently he did it to Socrates a little bit too. But anyways, hi.
Oh, I was just thinking too with communication. Something I've realized recently is the timing is really important. Not just to communicate when it's not a good time for you, but if you have something you want to share with someone, what are they doing at the moment?
Right.
And the timing of that. Like I might have the best pun in the world, but if Kate's studying Latin declensions, it might not be the best timing.
Right.
That kind of thing too is that part of being loving is being willing to communicate when it's good for the other person too.
That's a great point. Yeah, I think just use this as a key. Okay, will this be truthful? Yeah, this is truthful. Might gotta clear you. Yeah. Will it be warm? Probably not, because it's going to withdraw from that person because I'm interrupting them. So yeah, good point. Great. Let's